a lot of our trainings are based on the mindset, skill sets, and habits to lead you to getting more interactions. Okay. Today's training is going to be far more focused on what to do once you get those interactions so that you can build meaningful relationships. Now, for some of us, this is easier than others, but so you've all probably met somebody in your life where like when you walk away from that initial conversation, you're like, man, I really like that person. And then it seems like they know everybody else and everybody else kind of knows them, right? And so there are really specific skills to maximizing your collisions, right? So we go back to our 4 C's. So we have our 4 main C's at Princeton, right? It's our collisions. We want to have as many collisions with new real estate agents as possible. Connections. We want to make sure we're staying in touch with them. Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. Handwritten note card once we meet them. And then the cookie starts off our 13 by 30 journey, right? We get that cookie going. So collision, connection, card, and cookie, right? Well, how do we maximize those collisions? How do we make it so that person walks away feeling great about it? So very, very high level, very macro sense, guys. What is the thing that people are looking for that's going to make them go, wow, that was an amazing interaction. I really like that person. What do we know from our trainings or from reading or experience? How does somebody, if I said to you, what are the most, if we were doing a study and we said, and we looked at all the interactions, people were like, wow, I really enjoyed that person. What is the number one predictor in a collision that one person is going to like the other person?
Is it that the one person lets the other person talk about themselves and ask about themselves? Because people like to talk about themselves.
Yeah, exactly. It's really about, hey, was that person interested in me? Right. And so that really comes down to is letting that person talk, asking those questions, getting those different things is, was that person interested in me? And so there's all kinds of different studies on this, by the way. If you Google like the 36 questions to make somebody fall in love, and obviously those things are a little bit more like dating eccentric. You'll see, there's a bunch of articles about this, which is like, and by the way, you'll feel it, right? Because what happens when you start going through those types of questions, and some of the questions that we're going to share my screen with you today and go over the interview questions, which is something that is a recruiting tactic used to recruit realtors originally from Gino Blafari, and kind of talk about why I think it's exactly right for you guys to recruit realtors on the other side of it. Once you ask them, there are questions you can ask somebody that don't feel super personal, but that once somebody answers them, they realize they've told you more about how they think and what's important to them than most of the other people in their lives, right? And that makes somebody feel very close to you. So one of the questions that's like a really big one for the I love you thing, the 36 questions, which is not part of the interview questions, is if you could have dinner with one person, dead or alive, who would it be and why? Okay. Anybody here want to answer that question on the top of their head real quick? If you could have dinner with one person, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
I'll go, Mark.
Thanks, Fred.
I mean, listen, this might draw a line between some people, but I feel that there's got to be a God somewhere. So this person, whoever God is that created this, whatever this is, I need to have dinner with that guy or gal.
Okay. So now that tells me a lot about Fred first, right? So like if I just but and by the way, not like there's no good or bad answers to this stuff, right? But and there's a lot of room for follow-up questions there. So here's what we know. Fred is both a person who wants to have faith and a person who probably struggles with that faith, right? I learned like right there. Great. That tells you a lot about a person, but it doesn't make him unique. There's a lot of people I think who fall into that bucket, but it's very interesting. It's also like very like big scale, right? So he's not like, hey, I want to go have dinner with this person, or, I miss my grandmother, I want to go talk to her. It's much more like, I want to learn something about the universe, natural curiosity. I'm searching for meaning in life. There's a lot of things that go on in that answer, right? Anybody else willing to share an answer? These things are fun, by the way. And what's the other thing I'll find, by the way? Don't take it personally, but it seems like our loan officers that do the most amount of production, if they're on these calls, are usually the ones participating the most. I think those things are connected. If you're unwilling to put yourself out on this call, you're unwilling to put yourself out there in the world, you're probably acting as a secret loan officer, and you're not going to get as much business. And so this is a good opportunity for you guys to practice talking in front of groups of people and getting comfortable being a little bit uncomfortable. Who else has a good dinner partner? John, give it a run.
I'd like to interview Winston Churchill. I think he I mean, the unbelievable stuff that he went through, and he came out and he won in the face of all odds. Kind of feels like being out in the street right now.
Yeah, that's awesome, right? So you want somebody who like super brave, super tough, amazing leader, rallied people towards what seemed at times like an impossible goal, made those things happen, changed the history of the world. Learn a lot about a person, right? But by those things. Anyone else have one? By the way, Kate, where would Winston Churchill fall on your list?
Not very high.
Right. Like, yeah.
I'm like, all of mine are like dead celebrities, which is not very cool.
But it's so authentic to you, right? And so I learn a lot about you. We're building this relationship, right? So Kate, like if you said Winston Churchill to me, I've known you for a number of years. I know you very well. I would be blown away. That would not make sense to me based on what I know about you, right? But if you were like, I don't know, Michael Jackson or whatever, like that probably makes some sort of a sense, right? Something along those lines. Who's your person? Who's your dead celebrity?
I was gonna say Grace Kelly.
Okay, that's an
She
awesome
knew
answer.
like all my favorite films she's in. Like she worked with Alfred Hitchcock, and then she just became like a princess. It's so cool.
So think about what we just learned about Fred and John and Kate, right? And by the way, if you know those guys, like those answers fit, but they tell us a lot, right? And so when we're building meaningful relationships with human beings in general, not just realtors, these are the types of things that we're looking for, these connections to a person that kind of, and by the way, now let me ask you a question. After telling me that information, do you feel like we are further apart from each other or are we closer when you reveal that information to me?
Closer.
Right? It just feels. By the way, I just want you to know I have a to-do list that's written outside my office, and Kate added to it, give Kate a hug. So we're already pretty close. But yeah, you get to know somebody on a very different level. And by the way, if I asked follow-up questions on that, right? Like, oh, so when did you start watching Grace Kelly movies? Was that something you did with your mom? Or like, I don't even know if I've ever seen a Grace Kelly movie. And you're like, oh, let's watch one together. Now all this, or let me recommend one to you, right? Like we can keep going down this road to build that meaningful relationship. And so this is a habit that you really want to work on to take your business and your professional life to a completely different place. Mastering this where it becomes super natural for you is a huge differentiator for you. Now, I'll say this. I am the person that if I was in this class and the person presenting was looking for volunteers, I'd always be the first one to volunteer. I love hearing myself talk. Fred thinks he participates too much. If I were on Fred's side of this, I'd be much more into it than even Fred is. Okay, that's my natural personality. So for me, when I meet somebody to sit down, shut up, and listen, it's not totally natural all the time. Now, luckily, I am really actually interested in people, right? And so, and I've done some podcast hosting, and I've been a huge Howard Stern fan forever. And so the way that the trick I have for myself is when I meet somebody, I'm treating them like I'm interviewing them and like there's an audience. Hey, imagine you have an audience of people who you want to get to know this person. What are the questions that you would ask this person? How would you make that interview interesting? I find that really draws people into the relationship with me, and they always want more information. They start asking me questions. They follow up with me. They're the ones requesting me as Facebook friends once we leave that interaction, treating every interaction like it's an interview, okay? And if you start thinking of it that way, it's a kind of a way to trick yourself, right? It's like, hey, it feels uncomfortable asking this person some personal questions, right? If you think about it, it's like if you're interviewing somebody, right, you kind of get over some of that stuff. You separate yourself from the situation. It's less about you and your interaction. It's all about the other person. And if you can get your head in that right frame of mind, it actually takes the pressure off. So I'm going to share my screen right now. If you guys do some interview questions, I recommend that if you like looking at everybody's faces like I do, you can put the questions on one screen and everybody else's faces on the other. I like to see you guys because it makes me happy to know that I'm not alone and talking to myself.
Mark, I'm going to throw a sports guy in there.
Oh, you want to meet with? Who's your sports guy?
Lou Gehrig.
So what would you ask Lou?
What'd you think of Babe Ruth?
Isn't that so funny? That's the first thing I thought too. It's like, man, this guy was like the second greatest hitter of a generation. But really what I want to know is what it was like to hit in front of Babe Ruth. Right. And so
he died early, and ALS is a tough disease. So kind of like wanted to hear what his like whatever late 30s thoughts were.
Yeah, let me tell you, there, being famous sounds great, but you don't want to be so famous that they end up naming the thing that killed you after you, right?
Absolutely.
Awesome, guys. So here are the interview questions by Gina Before. I'm going to try to make this bigger so you guys can see it. No one's squinting. I'm sure there's somebody out there on their phone. But we'll walk through this, right? So what you'll find is these questions ease in very easily, right? And by the way, remember, these are questions that were designed for realtors. The number one real estate recruiter, the person who built Keller Williams, who was going out and recruiting all over the country. These are his questions where he taught real estate brokers, managers of real estate offices on how to recruit realtors. These are the questions they go through. So again, how unique for us, by the way. Not only is any other mortgage companies teaching loan officers this process, but obviously, so Gino's take on this was all real estate offices are basically the same. The only way to recruit people is to build a meaningful relationship with them, find out what's important to them, and then focus on how you personally might be able to help them with those one or two things. He said these are the questions that enabled him to do it. These are the ones that built that meaningful relationship. Okay. Now, what you'll find is some of these questions get really personal in the middle and at the end. That's the point, right? Now, you can't lead with that, right? If I lead with, I meet you like, hey, my name's Mark. You're like, hey, I'm John. I'm like, what was your mom like when you were growing up? You're going to be like, you're a weirdo. Okay. We don't want to lead with that one, right? But imagine, but have you ever talked to someone in your life about what your parents are like? Someone who's never met your parents, you meet somebody, maybe your parents are deceased, and you're telling that person about your deceased parent. That's a very vulnerable thing to do in a relationship. You will feel closer to that person after that experience. Okay. I will take it from my person. I don't do it a lot, right? I don't want to talk about my dad. My dad died 11 years ago. I don't like talking about it with people, but if someone takes a real interest in it, I will. And then I have a meaningful relationship with that person. I went on vacation with recently with a couple from my neighborhood who I really like, but I didn't know that well. And we were drinking in the pool, me and the other guy, and we got into a deep conversation about what our parents are like and what growing up was like and their flaws and the things that made them who they are and make who us are and the things that we carry around with us from that. And it's like, wow, after that conversation, that person's like on my short list of best friends, right? Like it happened in a pool over a couple of drinks. Those are the moments you're trying to have with your realtors, right? And so how do you lean into that? Does what I'm saying make sense to everybody? Anyone here fundamentally disagree or have questions about the theory of what I'm saying before the practice? So now here's the question I ask you. How many of you guys have at least 5 referral partners that you think you're their number one loan officer? Now, one of the things I want you to ask yourself about those people is how many of these questions, if you guys were on like the show, like Newlywed Game or whatever, right? Like, isn't that the one where they ask you questions like, they're like, what is this person like or whatever? And then the one person answers, the other person holds up the card. Is that the game? I'm Get the Right game show, right? Okay. It's a little before my time, but I remember watching as a kid. So if you were on the Newlywed Game with your realtor and these questions came up, would you know the answers to these questions? How on would you be? And by the way, I think a lot of times that will really dictate to you the quality of your relationship with this person, okay? So first, easy question, softball. This is the one, by the way, I've been asking everybody this question. I ask everyone I meet at a wedding this question. How would you describe how you run your business? Or more importantly, what do you do for work? If it's a realtor, how's your business going? How do you run your business? Where do you get your leads from? Now, if you're a loan officer and they're a realtor, these are pretty easy questions to ask, right? And by the way, it'll also separate the rookie realtor who has no idea and probably doesn't have a lot of deals going on from somebody who's more established and has put some time and thought into how they run their business. And so you'll learn a lot about this person. By the way, as you guys are students of the Princeton selling system and experts on how people can run their business to generate leads, if you find this person doesn't have a great answer, or there's areas where you can add color because of your extensive training here at Princeton Mortgage, this immediately starts offering you opportunities to add value to this person in the relationship. Now, again, in the beginning here, I'm not going ahead and trying to solve anything or even talking about what I know. I don't ever want to talk about me if I can avoid it here. I'll find that when I do this, and I've been practicing this a lot lately in different situations. Again, I want to talk about me. I really do. I love it. Okay, I like to teach. I like to show people what I know when I have these interactions. It's my natural tick. I give myself one sentence to do that before I transition back into another question to give the time of possession back to them. And in my head, I imagine this like a chess clock. You guys have all seen like the chess movies. If you haven't, go watch the one on Netflix with the girl who's the chess champion. It's an amazing one season series. What's the name of that show? Is it The Queen's Gambit? Is that it? Great show. Go watch it. I imagine a chess clock. I need to get back to hitting my buzzer for time of possession so that time of possession goes back for their move as fast as possible. Right? So like, you follow, a selling system, blah, blah. I've been really into Ninja. That's worked really well for me. So tell me, how did you get started in the business? So if I'm going to take time of possession, I give myself one sentence and I punch the clock. Questions about those questions? Is anybody here uncomfortable asking, how would you describe how you run your business, or how did you get started in the business? Either of those feel particularly invasive. Now, I will tell you this, I interview loan officers all the time. I've actually stopped doing it because I realize I have a time, like I usually have an hour and I'll lose the whole hour. If I ask a loan officer how they got into the industry, most times that is a 12 to 15 minute story, sometimes longer. I have literally asked people, like literally the first 15 seconds, hey, I'm Mark, Chief Revenue Officer, Princeton Mortgage, so nice to meet you. So tell me, how'd you get started in the business? And literally 17 minutes later, I haven't said a word. People, and by the way, no one was like, I decided in 8th grade, I really wanted to be a real estate agent. That's never the story, right? It's like, well, I was working here and I worked here and none of that was working for me. And then I had this cousin I went on vacation with, and I took a phone call and it was like, oh man, like, it sucks that you have to work on vacation. They're like, what are you talking about? I just put an offer and I made 20 grand on this. And that's when I knew I wanted to be a realtor. But it's always like some story like that, right? And they're usually excited to tell you about it. Okay. It also, again, builds the connection. You learn a lot about that person, right? Kate, I'm going to pick on you for a minute. How did you get into the mortgage industry?
This is a long story. So you had a podcast that you and Nicole invited my husband on, and then you guys hit it off, and then said you were like, okay, cool, I want to meet your wife. So the four of us got together, we became friends, and then we were friends for like a year. And then Nicole was starting this broker shop at Princeton with the Boulevard. And I was in a time in my career when I was ready to make a pivot. And I had way too much wine with your wife and decided to jump ship and join her.
So, yeah, I mean, and by the way, like I could ask 100 follow-up questions about that experience. Yeah. Oh, what were you doing before you got into the business? Why was it the time to pivot? Like, how's it, by the way, like, how do you run your business? What's that decision been like? By the way, it was a year and a half after I met Kate that she decided to join. I'm pretty sure, not 6 months.
Yeah, that actually sounds right.
And I think I started planting the seeds in like the second time we met. And then every time we met after that, I would be like, so Kate, like, how much money do you get for your commission at the lighting company? And like, do you really seem like you built a lot of relationships? Do you have to own those relationships? And by the way, how much does light fixtures cost? I know everything about the company that Kate used to work for, because that was my long-term strategy in terms of, I thought Kate would be really good at selling mortgages. Right. And I started working that plan and building that relationship early on. I also love Kate as a friend if she kept selling light fixtures forever. But once I heard that she wasn't happy where she was, it became my mission to find a way to get her into a place where I thought she could make more money and have a better life. Right. And so it worked. Right. And we're here and we're doing it. And she makes way more money here than she did selling lights. By the way, there's big money in lights, not for the people selling them, but for the people who run companies. Apparently you can spend a lot of money on lights. I had no idea. Right. Here's another question. Where are you originally from? Some people have a boring answer for this. Most people do not. And even if you have a boring answer, you can learn a lot about a person by their boring answer. Okay. So is this an invasive question?
No.
Do you get weird when people ask you where you're originally from? No, these are easy. These are softballs, but they're warm-ups, right? What do we know from our Cialdini training last week? We know that once you ask somebody for a small thing, they really want to be consistent, okay? So if I ask somebody to pass me a napkin, right? They pass me a napkin, and then I ask them, hey, can I bum a cigarette? Well, they might tell me to F off on the cigarette, but because they just gave me a napkin, they're actually more likely to give me a cigarette. I don't smoke. And then, by the way, if I ask them to buy me a drink, maybe they buy me a drink. Like there's consistency in it, right? So by getting people to ask these simple, easy questions, they become far more compliant later on to answer the more aggressive questions, right? And so to build that relationship, so we're starting them off in a way where we're building that consistency towards how our relationship is going to work and how interested you are in this person, okay? Now, by the way, when was the last time somebody asked you in your personal life or professional life, right? How'd you get started? Where are you originally from? Questions like that, where they seem genuinely interested in you. When's the time you got to really talk about yourself in that way? It was probably during your interview process at Princeton Mortgage, right? It doesn't happen a lot, is my point. So these feel like standard questions, but rarely do we get the opportunity to really talk about ourselves, and it feels special when we do. If you meet somebody, weddings are like my favorite, because weddings are like, especially I've gone to a couple lately where I didn't know a lot of the people there. So it's an amazing opportunity to like meet people and see what's going on, right? And so asking these questions, it's like, man, people will get really close to you, right? And you'll feel really connected with somebody, but people are excited to talk about themselves, right? So what do you do outside of work for fun? What else do you do besides work? Getting to know somebody outside the relationship. Is that something that you're weird about talking about people? Anybody here weird about talking about their hobbies? Is it because it's taxidermy of people? No, seriously, these are pretty simple, basic questions, right? How many people here have an interesting hobby they're into? Something they're into that would tell somebody a little bit about them. You all do. This is why it's so funny. Jamie, what do you do outside of work? You're muted.
Philadelphia sports.
Oh, I meant other Jamie. But yes, you're into Philadelphia sports. I know. Yes, Jamie.
So is he.
Russ.
So is he. So is he.
Oh, well, that was.
I'm into
give me the
Philadelphia
answer.
sports. I like to work out, play softball.
Did you grow up playing softball or baseball?
Baseball.
What year? When did you play through high school?
I did.
What town did you play for?
So I played for Doylestown.
Is that where you grew up?
Right outside Doylestown.
Was the team good when you were in high school?
It was average.
Does that still bother you?
A little bit.
Yeah.
There was a lot of potential there,
position,
but
what position did you play?
I played a bunch of positions. I pitched. I played center field, third base, little third base.
So the important ones, they put you where it mattered.
I don't know if they were important, but yeah, somewhat.
Center field and third base, those are pretty big ones, right? Well, it's
Well,
so
it wasn't shortstop, so
it wasn't shortstop. Does that bother you?
no, I didn't want to play shortstop.
So you can have a lot of fun with this, guys, right? You can really dive in and just like, hey, I play softball. Like that's as simple as that, right? And it leads into a whole different conversation. And I'm interested, right? And by the way, those are not uncomfortable things to say or talk about, right? And I can relate to it because I'm still pissed off about every game we lost in high school in all the sports I played, right? It's relatable, right? And so we now have a connection. It happens fast and easy. By the way, if it doesn't happen fast and easy, that's probably not the referral partner for you. Okay. I would print these, by the way, I'll send this out. I think hopefully Olivia sent it out, but if not, I'll send it out. Print these out and have them on your desk. Practice them. Look at them before you go into an open house on the weekends. This is the way to win people over. Now here's where it gets more personal. What was life like growing up in Doylestown? You don't have to answer, Jamie. I'm just picking on you because we just talked about it. Right? What did your parents do for work? What kind of memories do you have of your childhood? This is a transition shift. This is if those first calls went well. And by the way, sometimes you want to share something about yourself. It's like, I don't know if Doylestown was anything like Westfield where I grew up, but like it was super competitive in sports. Was that like where you were? Oh man, everything was competitive in Doylestown. It's like one of the best school. And by the way, I'm making this up. One of the best schools in Pennsylvania. Like, like some of the guys on my team went pro, blah, blah, blah. Like you get into the whole thing, right? Awesome. Like, did your parents push you to play sports or were you the one pushing them to get you to the field on time, right? Those are the kind of questions you guys take an interest, open that stuff up, right? I have asked people this question that I did not think we're going to answer it. And again, have had nothing to do for the next 35 minutes, but listen. When was the last time somebody let you have the floor to tell you about your childhood that you weren't paying to listen? This is rare stuff, guys. And by the way, so when a realtor's like, oh man, I really like my loan officer, that means like they're a nice guy or a nice girl who answers the phone when I call. Almost never are they going to have a meaningful relationship like the one that you can develop over your first couple of meetings with somebody through this process. I know Ken did a bunch of work with this when and it probably still is with realtors and recruiting. Ken, what were the results for you?
it's been transformational, this practice of asking these questions to uncover, to build that bond, but to uncover the opportunities to build on the next conversation. I have one scheduled for 11 o'clock today.
Is it getting easier?
Absolutely. And I'm getting better at it, where I'm not nervous about trying to figure out what the next question to ask is. Like it was choppy in the beginning, where I felt like the conversation would go one way and I'm still trying to get this question fit in. But yeah, it absolutely is easier and getting easier.
Yeah. To me now, it's just like, if I miss a question, I miss a question. Like, and by the way, like maybe that's the wrong way to look at it. Maybe I should be super disciplined about it. It's actually much more, I want to spend 30 to 40 minutes listening to this person, taking the conversation where it goes, where I think this person is going to be most interested in sharing things about me that are going to help me get to know who they are. And then when we walk away, this person's going to feel the kind of bond with me that when I call them, they're going to be excited to talk to me. Right? Because you answer the phone for the person who knows the stuff about you. Right?
Hey, Mark, I just wanted to add something. I'm noticing when you're asking the question, like, what do you do for work? That's disarming, because I think a lot of times when you just ask people, what do you do? It actually makes them withdraw a little bit. Like, I don't know, because like, is that how you're going to identify me as a person? I've always heard that. Don't ask people what they do, but be more specific. Like, what do you do for work? I think that's very valuable.
Yeah, and by the way, here's something too. Like, I've actually asked them, what do you do for work question? And some people get weird about it because like they're not proud of what they do. I have a really hard time having relationships with those people. I've noticed that even when I like go after it, like actually like we don't really have a lot in common. Like, for the most part. And again, these are not universal rules so much as like guiding thoughts for me. Like, oh, I'm in commercial real estate. I'm like, oh, like, what do you do in commercial real estate? They're like, yeah, I work at this company. And I'm like, oh, cool. That was the least important answer ever. And we're probably going to have a hard time relating to each other. I probably should do this with somebody else. Now, particularly with realtors, by the way, you definitely want realtors who want to talk about what they do, right? Because it's a pretty shitty realtor who's not going to tell people that they're a realtor. Kind of the job is letting people know that you're a realtor, right? So that should be less of a problem here. But even my other relationships, to Kyle's point, I think, again, when I'm doing these interviews, I'm not trying to just win every single person I meet over. I'm actually also trying to win over the people that I think I'm going to want to spend my life with, right? And for realtors, it's probably like, it's really probably like 30 to 40% of realtors that I would really be interested in having a meaningful working relationship with, right? Whether it's production-based, personality-based, or anything in between. So what's one memory that stands out? What kind of a student were you? Were you active in school? How many of you guys would consider yourselves that you were really good students in school? Dan? Yeah, most of us chose to be salespeople without salaries because we didn't have any other choices. We convinced ourselves this was the path, but the answer was, I got to find a way to make money and no one's going to pay me a lot if I have to go and follow the rules and do the school thing. It'll be the same thing with your realtors, right? But you learn a lot about a person based on how good of a student they were. Or by the way, how they describe the kind of student they were, right? Because like I knew some kids growing up that were like, didn't do the work, but still got really good grades, right? And I knew some people who did all of the work and really struggled anyway, right? Those people, and then the people in between, but how they talk about that experience, what they're still carrying with them from that experience. What are they bitter about? What are they excited about? How do they feel about it? Tells you a lot about a person. You get somebody to talk about what high school was like, you learn a lot about who they are, even if they're 60 years old now. Because it's not just about what high school was like, it's how they talk about it, right? How many of you guys are like, man, maybe I should change the way I talk about high school, right? It's like, well, yeah, you're telling people a lot about yourself. You're carrying a lot of that stuff around, right? It's formative years, right? So who from your childhood had the biggest impact on you? I find that people usually start glowing when you ask this kind of a question. If you had to pick one person, this is how I ask the question. If you had to pick one person from your childhood that you said had the biggest impact overall for who you become as an adult, who would that be? By the way, that's not really as invasive as some of these other questions. It's usually one that people think is a very thoughtful question. They usually get thoughtful about it. And then when they think of the person, they are excited to talk about why that was, right? Sometimes they get super emotional when they talk about it, right? Anybody here have any like random, anybody here of somebody who was not a family member who had the biggest impact on them growing up? I find when I get those answers from people where it's like, oh, my high school football coach, my English teacher, my mom's best friend, because my mom got cancer, like those conversations get super emotional when people have deep answers and you start to feel really connected with people, right? So you guys can see these questions here, and I'm not going to bore you by going through each question because I actually think it's less about which questions, but here is the one right here that got me the job at Princeton Mortgage. Because by the way, Rich asked me these questions when we sat down for our interview, which is really just us meeting. This is the one that changed me as a person and then made me want to work at Princeton Mortgage. And I didn't realize all that at the moment, but that's what happened. Because my answer for this came much faster than I expected. And I tend to think about it over the coming days. It actually nailed it in a way that you wouldn't expect because I'd never thought about it before. But I said, I hope there's a lot of people who say I helped them get to where they want to go. Right? And that was a transformative thing for me. It actually gave me direction in my life that I was already leading down, but where all of my energy comes from is these moments right here where I'm doing a training for you guys. And if one of you guys gets further in your life or your career, has better or more meaningful relationships from the training today, man, that is the thing that like lights up my soul. But by identifying that, it was very clarifying for me as to what I should be doing and how I should be leading my life. Right? And by the way, I felt a closeness with Rich after going through these questions and answering this stuff. And by the way, I didn't even ask a lot of questions about Princeton Mortgage. I decided I wanted to go work for that guy. It's been 6 years of regret. No, I'm just kidding. It's been great, right? We went through this process. We had a quick phone call and then we met in person and he asked me these questions and also the sales leader questions, which is a different set of questions that I can show you, which are also very good. And he said, you're the only person who had good answers for the sales leader questions. And when he asked me these questions, it was me deciding that I want to spend my life with this person. And so when you go through this with the realtors, and they will have, by the way, if you go through this list, they will be thinking about how they answered these questions for the next 3, 4, or 5 days. Because you're like, wow, like I didn't even know where that came from. Or like I hadn't thought about that before. I hadn't thought about who had the biggest impact on me. Or like that one football coach I hadn't thought about from 8th grade in the last 10 years did change my life. And you remember that story and you prompt these things, these emotional things, these connections in the brain that you're then connected to from positive experiences in building the relationship. So if you're not doing this, it's because you're scared or because you didn't know until today. But this is one of those areas where if you overcome your fears, you actually not only get to change your life, but you get to change the lives of the people you interact with. Having somebody go through these questions changed my life. Some of you guys probably had this experience, and when you met Rich on the recruiting, I don't know how many of these he got through with you, but this is all he does when he recruits. He doesn't talk about Princeton. He doesn't know the answers. He doesn't talk about our pricing or our products. He doesn't know what they are. But he in the recruiting conversations, he can build a relationship. He listens, he takes interest, and he pays attention to who people are and what the connections are. Anybody here come here because of Rich's answer about how awesome our pricing and products are, or the process for loans? No, right? That's not what it's about. It's not what it's about with your realtors either. And so when your realtors say, I have a person, or they have a favorite realtor, first of all, how many of you guys would be able to answer these questions for more than one of your current referral partners? Those are the relationships, by the way, that you won't lose. That someone's not going to start referring somebody else, right? That you want to be able to play the newlywed game with your referral partners. You should know where they grew up, how they grew up, what their experience was like in high school, what things carried with them, who influenced their lives, what's important to them, how they want to be remembered. When you know that about a person, that's a meaningful relationship. How many of you guys don't know all answers? How many of you guys have spouses you couldn't answer all these questions for? You don't have to raise your hand. Right? They will move your relationship with your significant other forward as well. How many of you guys realize that your spouse might not be able to answer these questions about you? And then what does that say about you and your relationship? Right? And so there, it's clarifying. When we talk about having meaningful relationships, this is what we mean. We mean relationships where you really know that other person. Knowing how they tick means that you can then be the best partner for them. All right, guys, I appreciate everybody. If you have any feedback from the meeting, either way, please fill out the survey. But if you have any feedback, that'd be great. Always trying to get better at these trainings. Happy selling, everybody. And if you have any questions you want to ask me individually about this, you know where to find me. Thanks so much. See you tomorrow.